Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. Okay, so this episode, The Night the Clown Cried 2, Tears of Doom, is the sequel to the original Night the Clown Cried. It is the follow-up episode, and it started, and of course, it continues the plot of the previous episode from earlier in the season, where of course Crybaby Clown comes back and continues terrorizing Crystal Cove. But and they do finally solve the mystery of what exactly it is that's going on, but with the Crybaby Clown. But yeah, of course, this episode, it's very much just follow up to this. But I should mention something that I think this episode has like a unique intro sequence. This is the first episode in the second season to play the original intro sequence, because obviously they haven't had a full team of 5 people to go into the intro sequence with. So of course, so they had an altered. So for this episode, they have an altered intro sequence where Hot Dog War actually winds up replacing Daphne in the opening sequence, which is just really funny. It's one of those things where it's like it goes into where Daphne should be, and then it's a very obvious Photoshop where it changes to show Hot Dog Water scene instead, and it's just really funny. But also this episode seems to. That intro itself, in and of itself, seems to imply some things regarding Daphne and regarding Velma and Hot Dog War's relationship, and I will get into that later, because that is indeed something that the directors have indeed commented on. But I will get into that a lot later. I will bring that up. But in case this episode opens up with Fred actually going to see. It actually opens up with Fred going to see a therapist, Dr. Hinklepoof, Dr. Hinklepoof is Fred's therapist, and what we find out is that Fred showed up for like an hour-long session, and eventually, after the better part of an hour, Dr. Hinklepoof eventually stops Fred and tells him to stop talking about traps, because apparently Fred just spent the entire session talking about traps, and according to the psychiatrist, Dr. Hinklepoof just has 42 different pages of notes, and that's just from the one session they had together. And of course, Fred is very happy about that. That kind of work. But of course, Dr. Hinklepoof is very much points out that obviously they're not getting anywhere, and they need to try a different tactic. So he decides to do some word disassociation therapy, where he says a word, and Fred has to say the opposite. And of course, every time Dr. Hinklepoof brings up traps, which obviously he knows Fred likes, Fred openly brings up Daphne. Which is at this point where Hinklepoof realizes that Fred absolutely wants to talk about Daphne. So they decide to talk about that for whatever little part of the session they have left. And of course, Fred does point out his very obvious conundrum, which is that he very much misses Daphne. He very much loves Daphne, but he doesn't know how to get her back, and is wondering if Hinklepoof can actually help him. But it's at this point where the timer for their session goes off, and Dr. Hinklepoof is obviously grown sick of Fred at this point, because obviously he's gone on for a better part of an hour. For most of an hour, talking about traps, and obviously he doesn't want. And obviously he points out that Fred's medical plan doesn't cover them talking for longer than the hour. So he immediately kicks him out and tells Fred that he can easily work it out for himself. But as the second Hinklepoof closes the door, he breathes a sigh of relief, happy that Fred is gone. But then Crybaby Clown actually shows up. And which of course causes Hinklepoof to panic, because he has no idea why Crybaby Clown is here. But as it turns out, Crybaby Clown gives him a very obvious explanation why he's there. He breaks into his therapy office and tells him that he's just so sad, and he wished Dr. Hinklepoof could help him, and also points out that he would be happy to indulge him in some aggression therapy, and then proceeds to pull out a bomb, which proceeds to completely encapsulate Dr. Hinklepoof in a cocoon, which of course he then uses to easily abduct and kidnap Dr. Hinklepoof and leave. And And of course, Fred is currently in the process of, Fred is currently in the process of working out how to actually get Daphne back, and eventually he decides to actually do something that she's always wanted in the only way he knows how. And he's inspired by this by actually seeing a picture of a fishing boat in the lobby. And he decides that, hey, this is how I'm going to get Daphne back. I'm going to find a way to use my trapping knowledge to get her to go on a date with me. That's the kind of thing he's thinking of how to get Daphne back. And he, of course, walks into the therapy office to tell his therapist the good news about the breakthrough he's had. But of course, he immediately becomes upset. But of course, he quickly realizes his therapist isn't there when he's gone missing, and of course notices all of Crybaby Clown's weaponry and all the other things that are just lying all over the place. And of course this is this point where Fred quickly realizes that Crybaby Clown might be back, so he immediately tries to figure something out. But meanwhile, Daphne is actually currently turning into bed. We actually do see her turning into bed. She's gotten ready for bed. She's actually tucked herself in, and she sleeps very soundly to the point where, as we find out, Fred used a crane to actually just kind of abduct her bed from her house. And of course she's very upset about this when she wakes up. But of course Fred immediately kind of brings her to a beach, and we're using a crane. And when she wakes up, she's obviously very annoyed at him for what he's done. But he does explain that obviously he did it specifically for her, and wonders if she likes it. And then proceeds to reveal that he actually set up a very romantic beachside a very romantic beachside date for her. And reveals that obviously he's very much like he wanted to do this. He knows that's something she very much wanted out of him, and he decided to do it in the most obvious way, in the probably the only way he knows how, using traps. So and of course Daphne does kind of appreciate the effort, but she also points out that obviously she points out the very obvious fact that she's with a guy now, and points out that Fred just needs to move on because she's already moved on. And with that, she then proceeds to pick herself up and leave. And obviously, she never put precious charges against Fred, because obviously he's still very much walking around after this moment. And of course, Fred is very upset about the fact that he wasn't able to actually figure out a way to help Daphne. But and of course, just proceeds to just return back to his house with the rest of Mystery Inc. And of course, he's very much zoned out. He has no idea. He's just kind of staring at his bookshelf. He's just kind of not really paying attention to what's going around him. Meanwhile, as we find out, Shaggy has been. This has been a thread throughout several episodes. But Shaggy, of course, is very much been trying to get his shaggy hair back. Obviously, he's not Shaggy without his shaggy hair. But yeah, he's not Shaggy. He's just normal. But of course, Shaggy is very frustrated about the fact that that his hair is taking so long to grow in again. And of course, what we find out is that he's actually been trying on several wigs. He actually tried on a very big, very voluminous wig, which of course he points out was obvious, and which of course he points out he's hoping that will work, but Scooby does indeed confirm that he doesn't, and that it doesn't, and at which point Shaggy then proceeds to vent his frustration about the fact that his hair isn't growing in, and it's at this point where in kind of a role reversal, Scooby proceeds to pet his master's head and console him and call him a good boy, which it's just really funny. Just normally it's the other way around. You pet your dog and it's a good and you call him a good boy or good girl. The roles are reversed here, where Scooby is the one who does the petting and consoles Shaggy. And it's just a really funny role reversal. But in case it's at this point where of course Velma is probably the only one taking the mysteries and stuff seriously, and she starts reading through the newspaper, and she eventually discovers that Fred's therapist has actually been abducted, and does ask Fred if he knows about what happened to his therapist, but which of course Fred openly denies having ever seen a therapist, and of course he's very open about that. He goes on a rant for several minutes about how he's never seen a therapist, and wonders if if he should see a therapist, because obviously the rest of the gang seems to think he's depressed. But of course it's at this point where Velma just points out that obviously the therapist he quote unquote hasn't been seeing, it has actually been abducted by Crybaby Clown, which of course causes everybody to start panicking and looking into it a little bit. But Fred is currently too zoned out to think about it, and Shaggy of course leaves with Scooby to go get some better hair. Obviously Shaggy is still very much frustrated over the fact that his hair is still short, so he leaves to go get a better wig, and of course, this caused Velma to become frustrated, because obviously she doesn't think anybody else is taking it seriously. But then Hot Tub Water actually settles up next to her and tells her that obviously that she still very much cares about the mysteries, and that that Velma still has her. And they then proceed to look into the mystery together, which of course is very cute. And again, I will get into this. I will get into it later, because it does wind up becoming relevant. But I just note that there is indeed a relationship thing going on, but like a very close friendship. That's the kind of thing that's going on. But in case, at the hair salon, we find out that a woman named Beautiful G, who actually runs the restaurant, hair salon, she's actually currently meeting with Angel Dynamite, who has requested that she shave her entire head, more or less, and of course, Beautiful G is looks at Angel like she's crazy, and even points out that it's such a big volume in his hair, and that is very beautiful, of course, Angel insists the fact that that the hairs that she is beautiful, hair is just hair, which of course annoys Beautiful G, because obviously she's a stylist. She's very much like, no, hair is beautiful. Be careful who you're talking to, but And of course, Angel immediately apologizes by calling her the best in Crystal Cove, and then tells her to just hurry up and finish the haircut. But and of course, Beautiful G does indeed do that. And what we find out is that it actually took them several hours to do that. It starts off in the morning it starts off like the morning, or at least the afternoon when they're working, and by the time she gets done with it, it's nighttime. But And of course, eventually, Angel is very satisfied with her new haircut, and of course, Beautiful G shows her to check out the bathroom mirror, pointing out that it's actually a trifold mirror. So of course, Angel immediately gets up to go to the bathroom and goes to go check herself out. And what we find out is that she's actually adopted a new outfit that is reminiscent of her original outfit from when she was originally in Mystery Incorporated. Which and of course the whole thing is that it seems to imply that she doesn't want to hide who she is anymore. She's very much one of those people who's very much like, I don't want to hide anybody anymore. And sure enough, Mr. E then proceeds to barge in several minutes later, telling them that as we find out, Brent Childs and Judy Reeves are actually coming back to Crystal Cove, and of course this causes Angel to immediately whip around and ask Mr. E what he's talking about, and also why now. But of course he points out that apparently they're coming back for Fred, and points out that obviously if that is indeed the case, that obviously Angel should consider getting close to Mystery Inc. again and keeping an eye on them. But Angel openly insists that she's not going to do that, and that she's not going to do that again, and also reveals that she's now started going by Cassidy Williams again, specifically since Fred Sr. is no longer in the equation. Obviously, it was because of Fred Sr. that she was hiding her identity. Obviously, Fred Sr. was the overarching antagonist of the first season. He was the main threat to the original Mystery Incorporated. And obviously, because he was currently around, both Mr. E and Angel Dynamite had to hide their identities. So now that he's no longer in the equation, and he's now in prison, Angel no longer has to hide her identity and start going by Cassidy Williams again. But also, more to the point, points out that she doesn't want to hurt the kids again, pointing out that obviously they're good kids. She doesn't feel like they deserve that kind of treatment. But And of course, Mr. E does point out that that's exactly the kind of thing that he fell in love with back when they were in the original Mystery Incorporated, and that does seem to imply that whatever romantic feelings that were there originally are no longer there. Obviously they barely tolerate each other now. So obviously, whatever romantic feelings the two had, that's long in the past, and they are no longer in love with each other. They're no longer the same people they fell in love with. So of course they've since moved on and are no longer like each other. But But of course, he also points out that those treats are also what make her very naive, and points out that obviously she needs to think her choices through carefully. But it's at this point where as Beautiful G is actually cleaning up in her salon, Crybaby Clown actually winds up plowing through the window in his buggy and proceeds to actually abduct Beautiful G, and on the premise that he really can't do anything with his hair, and asks her if she can make him beautiful, specifically with a bunch of flowers, and and proceeds to pull out flowers that spray noxious gas that knocks her out, and then he leaves. And also, Mr. E and Angel Dynamite are unable to actually go and investigate. Because as Crybaby Clown is rampaging through the salon, he knocks one of the kiosks in front of the bathroom door, which keeps them stuck inside, and they're unable to get out. All they can do is hear what's going on in the main room. And by the time they eventually bust out and get out into the open, Crybaby Clown is long since gone. And of course, it's at this point. It's at this point where Shaggy and Scooby are actually on their way to the salon to actually go pick out wigs, and of course, Scooby is listening to Shaggy all of the options for hair that they have, and of course Shaggy just hopes that they have Shaggy hair, and of course Scooby assures them that they do, and that they have Shaggy hair for Shaggy, which is just a really funny and cute little quote. But in any case, as they're actually on their way to the salon, Crybaby Clown then proceeds to drive out of the salon and bust it open with Beautiful G in tow, and of course the two of them immediately panic, but also point out that Crybaby Clown seems to be back, and of course the two of them do cower in fear a little bit, trying to get as far away from Crybaby Clown as possible. But of course the next morning when they do in fact go to tell the rest of Mystery Incorporated as to what exactly happened, because obviously Mystery Incorporated immediately comes to investigate, and what they immediately notice is that there's actually a large paparazzi, and of course, Velma then proceeds to reveal that there's actually a new publicist living in Crystal Cove called JR. And what we find out about JR is that he's very much one of those. He has a very interesting view of the news, I'll put it. So obviously in the real world, the idea of news is that you're supposed to tell the news in an objective fashion. You're not supposed to embellish anything. You're not supposed to make anything up. You're not supposed to make a good story and just do whatever. You're supposed to just tell the news as it is, so that people can be informed. And obviously, there are a couple of online news sites that don't do that, and for those reasons, I don't recommend most online news sites. I recommend some of the published stuff, some of the hard copy stuff. But yeah, I don't recommend. Game Informer is probably the only online one I trust. I literally anything else, no. They just read just take whatever clickbait article they find, they repost and recirculate it all over the internet, and that's how they make their news. And I do not recommend any of them. I do not recommend any of them. That's something I will openly admit. I do not recommend any online news site. Do not trust online news sites. Find something like more concrete, like the New York Times or something. Most online news sites are trash. I will openly admit that. I don't like them. But in case, this is all just a long-standing tangent to point out that JR, he does not share that sentiment that I share. And that is the long-winded tangent I'm going on. Normally you're supposed to tell the news in an objective fashion. JR isn't interested in that. What we find out is that JR is very much open about the fact that he wants to make the news as interesting as possible and chase down interesting stories, and without actually trying to actually show the news. He's actually just being like, I'm going to go find this most important article I can find, and that's the thing I'm gonna do. But And of course, what we find out is that Janet Nettles, his boss, obviously doesn't share that sentiment, pointing out that obviously they just want to report the news. But of course, JR is very much interested in just making it into making Crystal Cove into a tourist attraction again. Hence why he's just cataloging all of the different ghosts and stuff that are currently rampaging around Crystal Cove. And of course, Janet Nettles scolds him, pointing out the very obvious problem that one of her citizens was kidnapped, and she would very much like for him to not be kidnapped. But But of course, this is this point where Mystery Incorporated actually come in to investigate, and in the process, Shaggy and Scooby actually start wearing a pair of wigs and start trying on wigs, and one of JR's camera women. One of the women that accompanies JR around as the publicist, they decide to indulge Shaggy and Scooby for a photo shoot, which I think is just really funny. It's just this really funny sequence. But in case it's at this point where the gang is actually trying to investigate and trying to figure out what they're finding, and of course they're trying to figure out what their first clue is. And of course it's at this point where Angel Dynamite appears and asks the kids if they want any help, because as she points out, she obviously is not the same. Obviously everybody is just Scooby points out the fact that she's being there is just very awkward, because obviously the gang doesn't trust her anymore. But of course, Angel then proceeds to point out that obviously she's not the same person that she was. She's very much trying not to hide who she is anymore. She doesn't want to keep any more secrets between them, and asks them that if they want any help, she is there to offer it. And of course, Shaggy and Scooby immediately point out that they don't want her help, and Shaggy tries to do the whole "fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me" thing, but Shaggy is not very good with his words, so he kind of screws it up a little bit, and just winds up pointing out that a fool person can't be fooled again. And Scooby obviously is even less literate than Shaggy, so he just returns that sentiment and calls it a day. And of course, Cassidy is just very happy about that, pointing out that obviously she doesn't mind them not helping, but of course she then proceeds to actually get out and leave, and of course this is the point where obviously Velma and Hot Dog Water immediately go into looking for clues, but as they're actually investigating the scene, Fred actually sees Baylor Hotner and Daphne walk by, and he immediately goes to go find out what they're doing. And what we find out is that Baylor's actually taken Daphne on a bit of a shopping trip to buy new clothes. And of course, what we find out is that he very much thinks of her as a small town country girl, which of course she isn't, but she just kind of goes away with it because she's head over heels in love with Baylor and thinks he's just very attentive to her needs. And he's actually trying to buy her a new outfit, but and of course it's at this point where Fred immediately barges in and also tries to help shop for a new outfit for Daphne. And of course, what we find out is that he's going by the premise that he knows that she likes expensive taste and also is a bit of a sloppy eater, so he buys her a really big floppy hat, or at least he tries to, and also an apron that he points out she can use as a napkin because he knows she's a very messy eater. But of course, Baylor then proceeds to pull out several of the dress she's already wearing, and in various colors, although they're admittedly all the same color. That's the joke. That's very much the joke. He pulls out several that he says are all the same color, but that are all different colors. But they're all just different variants of purple, so they all look the same. But and of course, it's at this point where Daphne points out that obviously she's very happy about the fact that there's somebody who's actually attentive to her needs, and then proceeds to shoot Fred a look before leaving. And it's at this point where Fred finds out that apparently But in case the two then proceed to leave, and Fred goes back with the rest of the gang to regroup. And then of course what we find out is that apparently they're dragging obviously Shaggy apparently has his license. He and Scooby then proceed to take Mrs. Rogers to her plastic surgery appointment. And of course she points out that she's obviously only getting a pamphlet, but of course Scooby then proceeds to remark that obviously if that's just because all of her friends are doing it doesn't mean that she should too. But and of course Mrs. Rogers doesn't fully understand what Scooby is saying, so Shaggy just returns that sentiment, albeit worded a little bit nicer, about how she's beautiful the way she is and she doesn't need to change. And of course Mrs. Rogers does thank him for the compliment, but also points out that it's a very naive compliment, which implies that she doesn't fully return the compliment. She just kind of like, that's sweet, but that's also a little bit naive, dear. But in any case, she then proceeds to get out of the car with Scooby and Shaggy following shortly behind. And of course, what we find out is that apparently her plastic surgeon got abducted at some point. and they have no idea what's going on, and they of course have no idea what's going on, and of course what we find out is that apparently the plastic surgeon was taken, and his receptionist was just left to watch the whole thing. She's just hung up on the wall, like with a bunch of ice cream cones scattered all over the place, and a bunch of ice cream just made a big mess. And she does tell them that they took the doctor, which of course causes Scooby and Shaggy to panic and immediately jump into Mrs. Rogers' arms. But Mrs. Rogers does comment on that, pointing out that obviously Shaggy seems very cowardly for a general, but of course, Shaggy points out that he's once again returns the sentiment that he's undercover, and obviously he's not really worried about that. But of course, it's at this point where the gang then proceeds to show up to start investigating, and they do finally find their first clue. As they're investigating and trying to figure out what happened, they then proceed to pull out the transponder, a little chip that they find on the ground, and do point out that seems to be the clue that they're currently missing, and wonder what it actually goes for, and Velma and Hot Dog Warrior decide to analyze it, because obviously that's what they do, that's their thing. But meanwhile, Fred is also similarly trying to wrap his head around what exactly is going on, and is also continuing to brainstorm ideas on how to get Daphne back, and wonders if he can use a big enough net to actually trap her and try and figure out what's going on with that. But of course, eventually they do start trying to figure out what exactly is going on with who exactly is their current target. But they have no idea what's going. They of course have no idea what's going on, and are just trying to investigate. But in case Fred is still very much desperate to try and get Daphne back. He's still trying to figure things out. But of course, as we find out eventually, Velma and Hot Dog Warrior do eventually manage to analyze the chip and reveal that it is actually a locator chip, and which they then put into a transponder to try kind of track the signal. And of course they then proceed to point out that obviously wherever the signal is, that's where Crybaby Clown will most likely be. So Fred, realizing that he can use this as an opportunity to trap it and bring it as a present to Daphne, then proceeds to suggest that they should actually immediately go into trapping Crybaby Clown, and he immediately runs out of his house, while the rest of the gang just kind of look at him, and they're not entirely sure what's going on, so they just kind of follow. But of course, Fred then proceeds to pull out a net gun, then proceeds to bring a net gun with him to where they think it's supposed to be, and they do eventually follow it down a back alley. And they do eventually follow the signal. Fred eventually gets out of the mystery machine, pulls out his net gun, and shoots the source of the signal, and proceeds to pull it toward him, and then declares that he's finally going to put an end to this mystery, only to discover that the person he's trapped is Daphne, which of course she immediately hurls a series of insults at him about how much of an imbecile he is. But of course Fred has no idea what's going on, or why he accidentally trapped Daphne at all. So of course it's at this point where obviously Hot Dog Warrior then tries to figure out why she's emitting the signal, when obviously she shouldn't be emitting a signal at all. And of course what we find out is that apparently Daphne has a chip in her ankle that she apparently didn't realize was there. And of course she realizes she's been hit with a tracking device, when suddenly Crybaby Clown comes after her and immediately tries to abduct Daphne. He immediately tries to grab Daphne and tries to drag her away. And of course this results in a brief chase sequence where Crybaby Clown is trying to catch Daphne. He's not really succeeding at all in that, but Of course, Fred does it, and of course, at one point, he almost catches Daphne, but Fred shoves her out of the way, and he winds up getting his shirt ripped. And Crybaby Clown eventually gives up and leaves. But it's at this point where immediately JR immediately comes out of the woodwork with all of his reporters, but it also tells them not to actually snap pics of the Mystery Incorporated, calling them old news and small time news, and does point out that obviously he's more interested in the bigger fish to fry, which and of course, it's at this point where obviously they immediately point out that Velma immediately points out that JR seems to have mobilized a little too quickly, and the rest of the gang returns that sentiment, and Fred immediately goes in to question JR, pointing out that obviously he got there a little too quickly for a reporter. But the Crybaby Clown literally just left, and JR immediately shows up, and And of course, JR just kind of points out that obviously he's not really worried about the. He points out that obviously he's a reporter. It's his job to be there immediately. It's his job to find the news as it happens. And obviously that means he's very on top of the Crybaby Clown situation. And the second he finds out that something has happened with Crybaby Clown, he immediately springs on the opportunity to take pictures. At which point Baylor Hotner actually shows up and then proceeds to point out that he's been looking all over for Daphne and points out that he's been worried sick about her. And when Daphne asks him how he found her, he then merely responds that he found her through his love of her, which of course causes Fred to become a little bit sick to his stomach, and then proceeds to point out that obviously if Baylor loved her enough, he would have come with her and tracked her down to try and trap her in a net, which of course doesn't really fly with Daphne, and Baylor kind of just ignores that comment and also points out that obviously since Fred is currently shirtless and his shirt is a mess. He then proceeds to tell Fred that he needs to work on his six-pack, and tells him that his fellow Dusk guys, they all have their own cardio workouts that will help him get in shape very quickly. And with that, he and Daphne then proceed to leave. But then before he does, he then proceeds to ask Daphne if she told anybody yet and what they were planning. And Daphne, of course, has kept it a secret. And of course, nobody has any idea what exactly it is Baylor is talking about. So Baylor then proceeds to reveal that they're actually leaving Crystal Cove that night, which of course causes everyone to become very shocked. And Baylor points out that they need to hurry or they're going to miss their flight. At which point Fred goes to try and tell Daphne not to leave, but he then proceeds to freeze up and falls over instead. And obviously, and the implication that he's in shock. And for most of the rest of this episode, he does indeed remain in that frozen position. And in fact, Shaggy has to reel him around with a dolly to actually get him from place to place. So of course, now realizing they now have a suspect with JR, they then proceed to actually go to his house and go to stake it out, with Fred of course being wheeled up there with a dolly with a handcart. And of course, they then proceed to invest JR and do point out that he is indeed a very shady reporter. What they find out is that he pays a lot of people under the table to get good scoops so that he can be there first thing when a news breaks. And of course, they point out that obviously he has to be Crybaby Clown because obviously nobody would do that kind of thing for publicity's sake. But of course, that theory immediately winds up being disproven when Crybaby Clown immediately appears in JR's house, and of course, Crybaby Clown then proceeds to shush them through the window, but the gang then proceeds to try and warn JR about what exactly is going on and about how Crybaby Clown is behind him, and JR doesn't really listen to them, just telling them to get away from his window, but then Crybaby Clown immediately abducts him and creates a smoke screen, and JR and Crybaby Clown disappear. At which point they then realize that now they have no suspect and need to figure out what exactly is going on. And they then proceed to go back to Fred's house to brainstorm. And also they almost accidentally leave Fred behind, so Velma tells Shaggy to grab him and get him. And sure enough, they show up immediately at the house, and immediately go through Crybaby Clown's victimology, since none of it seems to add up. They quickly point out that obviously he's abducted a very strange group of people that don't really know each other. He's abducted a therapist, he's abducted a plastic surgeon, he's abducted a hairstylist, and now he's abducted a publicist. So of course the gang is very confused as to what exactly is going on, but it's at this point where Fred finally snaps out of his paralysis and does finally finish the sentence he was trying to start. But then he actually winds up solving the mystery while he was comatose. So he then proceeds to reveal that obviously he now knows what exactly is going on with the mystery, and points out that obviously all of these things are like spokes in a wheel. They're all connected by one at the center. And then realizing that they're all connected at a central hub, he then realizes that now he knows what exactly it is that's all connected, and then proceeds to believe he solved the mystery and tells them that now it's time to go in the traps. Although Scooby and Shaggy do momentarily misunderstand him, thinking that he's going to talk about food, but of course he then proceeds to insist that they're now going to go trap Crybaby Clown, and then proceed to leave. And what we find out is that the airport is that at the airport, we actually do see a private plane, and what we find out is that Crybaby Clown, all of the victims he's kidnapped have actually shown up, including Daphne, who was apparently abducted at some point and was tied up in the plane alongside the other victims, and all of them have been gagged with pacifiers, and Crybaby Clown, of course, then proceeds to go on a big speech about how how he's a little bit disappointed about the fact that he wasn't able to abduct a bigger entourage, but does point out that now they're all going to go back to where he's from, and does point out that he's happy to have gathered the few friends he does have. So, of course, with that, he then proceeds to remark that he is very happy, and now he's going to proceed to use the plane to actually take them where he needs them to be, so that he can actually develop his own entourage, and proceeds to climb into the cabin, only to discover that Shaggy and Scooby have actually gotten in the cabin before him and are pretending to be the pilots. And this, of course, infuriates Crybaby Clown, who immediately chases them around. And of course, the rest of Mystery Inc. are close behind the plane and are immediately trying to get to board it. But then, in the process of them trying to fight Shaggy and Scooby trying to fight and distract Crybaby Clown actually sets off the plane and it proceeds to fly off with them in it. And of course, Fred quickly, and of course, Hot Dog Warrior is the first to point out that obviously the plane isn't supposed to be doing that. It's not supposed to be just veering around uncontrollably. And of course, Fred quickly realizes that they're going to need a pilot, because obviously that's very dangerous for the plane to just be flying around out of control. So of course he immediately drives up next to the plane and tries to get as close to the plane as possible. While Scooby and Shaggy kind of run and hide from Crybaby Clown in the process, and of course, while Crybaby Clown is fighting him, he does at one point point out that they shouldn't make him cry, and they wouldn't like him when he's crying, but of course they add that they don't like him now. So yeah, there's just a couple of little witty lines of dialogue between Crybaby Clown and Scooby and Shaggy, which is just really funny. But of course, Fred points out that obviously he's the only one who's actually trained to fly. Apparently, he's a trained pilot. Became a trained pilot at some point. They don't clarify that. They just point out that, hey, this is something Fred can do. They don't clarify that. They don't reveal how that happens. They're just like, Fred's just like, I'm the only one who's trained to pilot something, so you two have to maintain ground control. And of course, Velma and Hot Dog Warrior immediately take the wheel, and Fred climbs on top of the mystery machine and proceeds to grabs onto the landing gear as the plane is taking off, which does enable him to get inside the plane. And Daphne actually does see this from the window, but of course, this is as Crybaby Clown. This is as Crybaby Clown is actually trying to fly the plane. Is actually trying to catch Shaggy and Scooby, and he eventually corners them in the bathroom. But and they claim that that's occupied, nobody's in there. But of course, they're lying. So Of course, Crybaby Clown immediately corners them and tries to capture them again, but they immediately escape him and proceed to start untying Daphne, and eventually Fred does indeed wind up getting on board the plane, which of course enables him to actually get into the plane and start trying to drive it, and while everybody's distracted, and of course, Crybaby Clown does notice that Shaggy and Scooby are trying to abduct Daphne, are trying to save Daphne, and does immediately tie them up with confetti, which does cause them to become incapacitated for the rest of the episode. But of course, he immediately lashes onto Daphne to kind of hold her hostage, which Shaggy and Scooby do shout to Fred about from their place on the floor. And Fred, realizing that he can't let Crybaby Clown win, immediately starts driving the plane around in circles and doing a bunch of loop-de-loops and flying around to knock Crybaby Clown around. And of course, this also causes Shaggy and Scooby, by consequence, to fly around as well, because obviously they are currently tied up. They are unable to actually free themselves, so they're just bouncing around the cabin as well. And eventually, Fred does succeed in actually knocking Crybaby Clown out by having them fly into the main cabin of the plane, and then punching him in the face once he recovers from his dizzy spell from Fred spinning the plane around. And of course, Fred immediately frees all of the people that have been abducted, and including Daphne. And then proceeds to ask to finally unmask Crybaby Clown now that they've captured him and have successfully tied him up. And what we find out is that it's actually Baylor Hotner, and it was implied that it was Baylor, considering the fact that Daphne was last seen with Baylor Hotner, and then they just disappeared. But of course, everybody's very confused as to why Baylor Hotner did it. So Baylor Hotner reveals that actually, he created the character of Crybaby Clown to research a role for a movie that, as it turns out, shares the name with the original episode that Crybaby Clown appeared in. The movie is called The Night the Clown Cried, and the episode was supposed to be this thing about how Crybaby Clown was supposed to be this research project for him, and what we find out is that Baylor had actually used his knowledge of aesthetics and makeup and all the other things that you need to do to be an actor to actually create the costume of Crybaby Clown, and also stole a prop from his backlot to use as a vehicle. And that was what the first episode was. It was him perfecting his craft, and then the second episode was of him creating his entourage and gathering up all the people he needed for his entourage and create his new group of friends. And of course, what we find out is that he gathered up everybody he needed to make him famous. Obviously, he needed a therapist, a publicist, a hairdresser, and a plastic surgeon. All things that Baylor questionably needs, but all things that he needs to actually become famous. But and of course, he abducted Daphne because, as he puts it, she is a small town girl, and he wanted to date someone like that to actually look like a stand-up guy, which obviously is revealed in this episode. He isn't, but that's what the illusion he wanted to give off. And of course, he then reveals that he put tracking devices in all of them because you need to know where your friend, because as he puts it, you need to know where your friends are at all times. And obviously, that is not how you keep friends, like at all. But and of course, he then remarks that he would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for these backtown weirdos and all of their mutt. And it's at this point where Daphne actually winds up slapping him, pointing out that obviously she feels very betrayed. And it isn't outright stated in the episode, but it's implied that he picked Daphne specifically as a victim because she's a fan of the Dust novels. Obviously, it's brought up in a previous episode that she's a fan of the Dust novels, and I kind of mentioned that in one of my previous reviews. But she's very much a fan of the Dust novels. And it's possible Baylor groomed her specifically because she was a fan of the Dust novels. He picked her specifically because of her super fanboy status. He knew because of her status of a super fangirl, she would unquestionably do whatever he asked. And for that reason, he obviously picked her for that reason. So, but of course, she does point out to Sheriff Stone that obviously she knows who her friends are now, and then proceeds to tell him to take Baylor away. And of course, Sheriff Stone and his cops then proceed to scoop Baylor up and have him arrested. And of course, Fred is very happy about the fact that Daphne is now okay, and also states that if she wants her place back in the gang, she can have it. And also is somewhat implies that he wants her back, wants her back in general. But he corrects himself and just tells her that she has a place back in the gang if she wants it. And of course, having realized that Baylor was not the nice guy she thought she was, she realizes that obviously she did miss her friends and decides that she will indeed take her place back on the gang. And of course, everybody is very happy about the fact that she's back, and Scooby-Doo even leads out a Scooby-Doo and and Daphne too at the end. And everybody is happy except for Hot Dog Water, who is now no longer a part of the gang because Daphne's back. Obviously, she was very temporarily part of the gang because Daphne was back. But she did add some interesting things to the group because she was also one of the few people who actually solved the mystery. She helped Velma with solving mysteries. So of course she's very upset about the fact that she's made a new group of friends. But yeah, unfortunately, Hot Dog Water, Marcy is no longer part of the group anymore. But Daphne is finally back and is back in the group now. So yeah, it did wind up working out, and I did say it would have to be something. I did say it would have to be something big for Daphne to rejoin the gang and forgive Fred for what he's done. And of course, that is indeed exactly what happened. Obviously, she got abducted by Crybaby Clown, who turned out to be her now ex-boyfriend Baylor Hotner. So I think she's back in the gang permanently. But also, and this is just kind of revealed in a little sideline, Brad Charles and Ginny Reeves are coming back eventually. So that's going to be a thing that the episodes are going to do at some point as well. We haven't officially met them yet. We've seen them in flashbacks, but I've never officially met them. So I am interested to see what's going to happen when they come back. I am interested to see how Fred is going to react when he finally meets his parents again. Obviously, he has never met his birth parents. So, yeah, as it turns out, Fred going on this little side quest to go and find them, that was completely unnecessary because they were coming back anyway to come find him. So obviously, it doesn't really matter. But in any case, yeah, that's going to do it for my review of Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. What you guys think? Let's get a discussion going in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks that are my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent one. It may or may not be this one. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace!